All right, we're live. Hey, Lolo, how are you doing?
Hey, Perry, hanging in there. And yourself?
I am rocking and rolling. Very excited for what we've got today, where we get to do a little bit of praising Joseph Smith, actually. Um,
Yay.
Before we get into that, I do want to let the audience know that in June and July, I am going to have a bit more free time available to work on other stuff. So if the audience has anything that they would, any questions, any interesting topics that they would like for me to cover, I'm gonna have time to be able to just sit down and you know do weird random stuff. Priority would be given to Book of Mormon related videos, Book of Mormon related questions, uh, and all of that. But if there's something like the various arguments for God and how that lines up with Mormonism, broadly speaking, that could be a sort of topic that would be fun to explore. Divine command theory, Euthyphro, the problem of divine hiddenness in Mormonism, or the chiastic structure of the first How to Train Your Dragon movie. I would be like, if you've got ideas, let me know. What people are interested in. I'd be happy to try and fit stuff in. I don't know how much I'm going to be able to necessarily do, but I will have more time available to do stuff. So this is just a call to the audience for stuff, for ideas that they would be interested in seeing me do. And I will have quite a bit more time available to do that through June and July.
So we're going to get that D&D alignment for all of the Mormon prophets, right?
Yeah, if
Yes!
that is something that people would be interested in, yeah, I could do a weird D&D alignment chart for the Book of Mormon, or sorry, for the prophets. I suppose you mean the Brighamite
Yes, of
Church of Jesus
course.
Christ of Latter-day Saints prophets.
Yes.
All
Yes.
right, yeah. Yeah, we could do that. Do alignment charts for various characters in the Book of Mormon would be fun too.
Great.
Yeah, so options are on the table. Just let me know
Yes.
either in the comments on this video. I read through the comments when they come in, or on our Facebook page as well. I'll put a post out for that. And yeah.
And it's only going to take me a few more games, but I think I can get my Martin Harris up to a level 96 scribe.
I'm pretty sure that Martin Harris would be like a warlock or something like that.
He just keeps losing his tools. Sorry.
Though I think John C. Bennett would be a bard. And
oh my gosh, yes.
Something like a chaotic neutral bard, I think, is what I've got John C. Bennett as.
I can 100% see that. Yes.
I may also be willing to do a whole video talking about one of my favorite D&D characters, who was a Mog, and he was a bard, and there were all sorts of dog puns on the character sheet, and it was fantastic. Completely broke our game by becoming super rich through various jokes and schemes. Anyway, fun times.
So you had Joel Osteen, basically.
He was much friendlier than Joel Osteen.
That's fair. That's fair. That's most things are.
Yeah. Yeah. Good times. A very fun character to play. And I'm sure that my DM was very happy with me at all times playing that character. But let's get into something that has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. And we are, of course, talking about Enos. And I want to be clear for the YouTube bot that I said Enos, Enos. There is no consonant before that E sound. Please do not flag this video as being age restricted. We're going to be very much adults here as well. So,
of course, with the utmost propriety.
I'm going to go ahead actually and share this this particular window. So the Book of Enos is a short one. We're actually in like this collection of 4 one-chapter books as Joseph Smith is wrapping up the small plates. I really think that this is the sign that he was done and just wanted this project to be over with.
Like, I'm so finished with this.
Just from a naturalistic perspective, this is the sign that those 90 working days of just grueling pace, yeah, he was done.
Real done.
So what in last week's episode, we talked about how Nephi appears as really a self-insert character. And I want to put forward the Book of Enos as another example of self-insert characters in the Book of Mormon. And that is because we have in verse 2 that Enos is going to sit before God and he is going to ask for a remission of his sins. And then in verse 5, when the Lord appears, he says, Enos, thy sins are forgiven thee, thou shalt be blessed. And this is remarkably similar to the first vision accounts. I think this is the common through line actually in the four first vision accounts that we have, that the Lord is forgiving Joseph's sins. This is the big thing that happens in all of them.
Somebody was guilty.
Somebody was feeling guilty about something. Now, this is, I think, just the common concern that folks have. They hope for the Lord to say, hey, your sins are forgiven and all of that. And if I'm not mistaken, there are other places in the Doctrine and Covenants as well where when the Lord shows up, he's telling Joseph, your sins are forgiven, but quit doing the thing.
Maybe don't marry 14-year-olds. I'm sorry, go ahead, what?
No, that the Lord wanted that.
That's true. What was I? Silly
angel
me.
and a flaming sword for that.
That's fair.
But yeah, I find this to be another example of Book of Mormon characters having a certain self-insert quality to them, but them not being autobiographical as such. Like Enos isn't Nephi in any biographical sense, but in a self-insert sense, totally.
Yeah.
Okay. And we get some stuff where basically Enos does not understand population dynamics any more than the previous Book of Mormon authors did. There are some wars and stuff that are continuing to happen.
Because it wasn't all written by the same person, Perry.
That might be the issue here, right? All right, so verse 20, we get some racism.
Shocking!
Shocking racism, right? Which is interesting because Jacob pushed back against these racist ideas, but Enos is like both feet in the deep into the pool here with the racism that like the Lamanites are a bloodthirsty people. They're full of idolatry and filthiness. They feed on beasts of prey. They're dwelling in tents. They've got short skin girdled about their loins. Their heads are shaven. They're pretty good with the bow. I'm gonna give them credit there. And the scimitar, whatever. This is a very common critical point. We hit the scimitar thing and we're like, what is this? Like, what are you doing, Joseph? I can't help but imagine that the scimitar was a weapon that was like known to come from the Middle East. In Joseph's like
we have a storm hitting. I'm so sorry, everybody.
Hopefully your internet holds. Yeah, I can't help but imagine that the scimitar was a story of like Arabia, a weapon from Arabia that was known to Joseph in that milieu, and that is what he's referencing here. But I might be mistaken. This is just my imaginings of what would have been available, and I am doing that based off of the fact that the scimitar shows up here in the Book of Mormon.
So I feel like Joseph was also just working off of what he was imagining as well. So
yeah,
I mean just saying.
I think that we've done a lot of work to try and indicate or try and show like where the most likely source of Book of Mormon authorship would come from, and that it points to Joseph Smith. That just continually we are pointing in the direction of Joseph Smith is the author of the Book of Mormon. And in as much as we see other people show up, a certain sermon voice or something like that appearing, that can be accounted for by him basically stealing sermons from other people. Not in the sense of like he had their sermon and it was sitting on somewhere on somebody's desk and he went in and stole it or something like that, but from he was sitting at somebody's sermon and he was like, this is interesting. I like this. And now I'm going to repeat that in this particular source. This is not something that I think that he's doing nefarious or anything like that per se. Just this is what Christianity is. This is how
Yeah.
Christianity sounds. And so when I am doing things to profess Christianity, this is what that is going to sound like. And it gets better at that as time goes on. I'm making a little bit of a reference to a recent Mormonism Live episode, just for the record. In as much as like those voices appear. I think that can be accounted for in that way.
Agreed.
All right, so they did nothing save it was they did eat nothing save it was raw meat, and they were continually seeking to destroy us. Like this is, yeah. Now, we're
savages
right,
is basically what they're saying, which is not racist.
These are all stereotypes of like the indigenous Americans as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Which would have been very much the thought process in, the early 1800s in New York.
Right. So as we're trying to kind of build out this myth of where did the indigenous Americans come from, and we're going to be riffing off of the mound builder myth and all of that, you get this in Enos. I like it fits that model so well that it makes sense. Okay, so then we get the Nephites, right? We're gonna describe the Nephites, and we talked a little bit about this in the pregame about some anachronisms that are going to start showing up here. So they till the land, they raise all manner of grain. All right, we're fine with that. We can call the grain maize or something like that. The fact that maize is never actually indicated in the text is an anachronism of omission. But okay, and fruit. So cool. We're going to be cultivating fruit. And then we get this fun phrase, flocks of herds.
I grew up, I'm from the South. I am from Texas, where there are more cows than humans. That's not a thing.
Now, I may just be a poor suburban California boy, not so familiar with your big country words.
Let me tell you, in the country, we like to say stuff with as few syllables as possible. It's too hot for us to have to say those many letters and words.
I don't know what a flock of herd is, and
I don't either. I know what a flock of seagulls are, though, and they were amazing.
Possible. I'm going to grant that it is possible that this is a certain like 1830s New Englandism, because Joseph was a farm boy.
That's fair.
And maybe flocks of herds was a thing then. It is not now. And now it seems very strange. It is a weird phrase.
Agreed.
And then flocks of all manner of cattle of every kind. And I think that herds is how cattle come in.
My cattle never flocked.
Yeah, like you can have a flock of sheep, I think you can have a flock of goats. I know you can have a flock of seagulls.
I thought you missed that earlier. I'm so proud. Thank you.
No, I was setting that up. There was a gas shortage and a flock of seagulls. That's about it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so there's you have herds of cattle. Okay.
Yeah. Nope. Not flocks. Not a thing.
Okay. And you have a murder of crows. That's fun.
That's true. You do.
Yeah. And that's never mentioned. There are no such murders in the Book of Mormon, and I find that very suspicious.
But there are all kinds of other murders in the book.
There are plenty of other kinds of murders. So there's this other issue too, where you have goats and wild goats. And to my knowledge, there were no domesticated pre-Columbian goats. There were wild goats, and I think that this is what apologists try to lean into with like the flocks of sheep and that sort of thing. Is that it was goats, because there were in fact goats in pre-Columbian America. but they weren't domesticated. And so going through this particular distinction is anachronistic. It creates an anachronism.
It's a little.
Yeah. And then the final anachronism here is mini horses. So there was this study that published in the University of Texas Journal of Science. Nope, not the University of Texas Journal of Science, the Texas Journal of Science. That talked about how they had found these horse bones in like a Navajo settlement, or at least what would have been an ancestor to a Navajo settlement.
Okay.
And these are like pre-Columbian horse bones that generally date to, or they dated to a time around the period of the Jaredites or so, potentially the Lehites, based off of stuff that was around the bones. So there was stuff around the bones that dated to that period of time. Now, Stick of Joseph has done a video on this. I think Scripture Central has a video on this. Scripture Plus, I think, pointed to this study as well. This study comes from a journal that is not highly rated. It has a very low impact factor, for one. For two, it hasn't undergone like any real peer review. And for three, it is like overturning or at least targeting like a period of like, or like the academic consensus on this topic. And it has not sparked waves. Like nobody else is really talking about this particular study outside of Mormon apologists, really, which is one of those signs to me that indicates like, I may not know a whole lot about this field, but there are probably some issues with the study.
Yeah. like if the apologists have jumped on.
If the apologists have jumped on it and they are the only ones who are interested in it,
that there's a reason.
That to me is one of those, like, there might be a reason. Exactly.
Yeah.
If it's in a journal that is not specifically about like horses and it's a low impact factor journal, it's not an archaeology journal, all of that, like these were all signs to me where it's like, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It doesn't mean that it's bad or anything like that. It just means let's hold that. Pause. Let's hold that at arm's length.
Yeah.
If there were horses in America at that time, they were small and few in number.
Yeah. It would not have been a mini situation.
Right. This passage is indicating that among the people of Nephi, like as far as what they were like cultivating and working with, there were many horses. And that is anachronistic. It doesn't fit. And there is no evidence to support that they had many horses, that any civilization in pre-Columbian America had many horses.
Right.
And in fact, there is tremendous evidence against that position.
Yeah.
So,
well, and like I was saying earlier, and I'm not going to word it. I didn't word it well then, and I'm not going to word it well now. There are some situations where I have seen apologists go, see, look, when the Book of Mormon was written, he said this, and it wasn't for, 100 years, and science proved him right. This isn't going to be one of those situations. There's not going to all of a sudden end up, oh, guys, these bones that we've been finding, giant flocks of horses everywhere. Who knew? No, it's not.
Right. It's not. So to your point, what we have is that the body of scientific knowledge is expanding. We are learning new things, but we are converging on certain points. And none of those points support the idea that there were domesticated pre-Columbian horses that were a factor in any pre-Columbian American civilization.
Correct. Yeah. There's no way.
Right. So this is an anachronism that does not make sense. It's not going to converge in a way that's, as you noted, going to support the apologetic position, the faithful narrative. Yeah. There are these flashing lights behind you, and I'm realizing that is lightning, not flash photography. You don't have like an entourage behind you.
The paparazzi hangs out sometimes, but
yeah, I mean, I'm used to that, but yeah.
I mean, no, that's it is tornado season in Texas. We are at the very beginning.
It is. I did not like that season in Texas when I was there.
I loved it. That's when we all go stand out on the porch and watch what's about to kill us.
No, I'm fine with earthquakes. It's whatever for me. Like an earthquake happens, and I'm like, all right, this is happening, I guess.
See, I don't want the ground to eat me. That's terrifying.
But you're fine with with swirling funnel clouds of death just appearing and ripping apart your like.
Maybe I'll go to Oz. Do you realize the potential?
Yeah, the potential for going to Oz. I think that does not mean what you think it means.
It's the only entertainment we've got in my bustling metropolis of less than 2,000 people. We don't have a movie theater. We just go stand on the porch and watch weather. That's our TV.
That is generally true. I will grant that point.
I mean, we got to go out there and take care of the flocks of cattle and watch the weather.
Your flocks of herds.
That's right, our flocks of herds.
All right, let's jump back into the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, sorry, that's totally on point with everything we're talking
about. So let's see. So there are two more points from Enos that we discussed before that I'd like to cover, and that is the wars between the Nephites and the Lamanites over the course of Enos's days. And again, this is population mechanics just not making sense in this section of the Book of Mormon, or really anywhere in the Book of Mormon.
I was going to say anywhere.
And that Enos began to be 179 years old. And this is where he's going to be like, I am soon to die. Last week we talked about basically like this timeline issue, and RFM covered this on his podcast in detail. We are just a second witness to what RFM discussed in Mormon Sunday School. And yes, exactly. The issue is that
she's not an apologist anymore. She's doing great. I'm really proud of her.
The issue is that we now have 180 years that have passed away in 2 generations. Right? This isn't, Jacob is born at the latest 8 years after Lehi leaves Jerusalem, and most likely a little bit earlier than that.
Yeah.
He is born in the wilderness, so at some point after this 179 years, but at the most gracious, what we have is 170 years have passed away. I'm being very generous here, by the way, with saying that 170 years have passed away for 2 generations to elapse, a father and a son.
We were talking about, in the pregame. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. You're jumping right into the point I think I was going to go to anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, we were talking in the pregame, so and you would think the fact that I'm fixing to say this on a podcast, I would have done research ahead of time, but you would be wrong. So there's an American president, John Taylor, I'm pretty sure, who has a living grandson today, and it's because he was 80 something when he had a kid, and then the kid was 80 something when they had a kid. And so, but even being, that's 3 generations, like you were saying, to make up what there's, and I mean, it's less than what they're saying would be 2. So
yeah. And that's with the advances in modern medicine and all the other stuff as well.
Yes.
That was a cool burst there of.
It really was. I was
that was awesome. That was awesome. Right. So no, exactly. So we have 2 generations to cover this 170-year span of time, which is, it strains credulity. It's strictly speaking, because men continue to produce viable gametes until they die, from puberty until death.
Did you say Enos? What? Oh, I'm sorry.
It is strictly speaking possible for that to occur. It is unlikely.
Get that many people to live that long.
It's unlikely. It just is. It's too unlikely. And
every dog is sitting here wanting me to protect them, which I get because I can control the weather. But they're sitting on my stuff and my notes, and I'm like, I need that. Can you move, please?
Okay, we've got. I'm gonna try to make sure that we get through this before you lose internet. We've got Jerem now up on the table. And Jerem is also very racist. Let's see, where
What a
were we at?
surprise.
Okay, so Jerem talks about here in verse 5 about how the Nephites are practicing the law of Moses. And this is, as we've discussed before, an issue for a few different reasons. One is like the potential anachronism of the law of Moses, though likely it probably was codified before the brass plates would have existed. It just would be a little bit different than what we have today.
Right.
But the ability to actually practice the law of Moses depended on the temple, and the temple was dependent on the land of Jerusalem. These things are, it's hard to appreciate that today, and it would have been hard for somebody in the 1830s Protestant American context to really appreciate
Yeah.
how dependent the practice of the law of Moses was on the land of Jerusalem. But for a First Temple Jew, that would have been perfectly clear. Like,
Yeah.
you need this land in order to, this is where Adonai dwells.
Yeah.
And in order to practice the law, you need a priest of Levi, in as much as that makes sense,
Right.
in the temple where Adonai dwells, where Adonai's, where basically the provisioning of Adonai's power and dwelling is located. Because outside of the land of Israel, outside of Jerusalem, we don't have these innovations yet, these theological
Right.
innovations that really allow for the worship and the practice of the law of Moses outside of that land. That is a
Right.
post-exilic innovation that occurs because of the destruction of the temple. And so, yeah, the Nephites are skipping a step here. Now, it's possible that they develop it on their own, but for that to develop independently it would be a coincidence to the point of a pretty extreme coincidence. It's just unlikely.
And how many coincidences do there need to be? Okay, so we're going to have the coincidence of these two people living unreasonably long for the time frame that they're in, who happen to be father and son, and then with all the other coincidence, I mean, at what point is it just too astronomical?
And I think that when we went through just First Nephi, we found that there were too many coincidences for it to be historical, right?
Yeah.
We landed at that point. We ended First Nephi. We're like, look, this is ahistorical, right?
Right.
You would need a coincidence of somehow, some way, Nephi deciding to write down Deutero-Isaiah, like developing
Right.
Deutero-Isaiah before it was even written.
Right.
And
Before it was a thing.
like that alone puts it outside of the realm of historicity. And so, yes, we are ahistorical, but it is. It just is interesting to me. The law of Moses stuff is interesting when it comes up because I think that it's unlikely.
Yes. That's a nice way to say it.
Yeah. Okay. So we got the Lamanites. They're exceedingly more numerous than they of the Nephites. Just weird phrasing.
It really kind of is.
So, but this is one of those like biblicizing English things. So I know that, like what apologists are going to want to say is that like these types of phrases are an indication that we're translating from the Hebrew. And I reject that position because what this sounds like is biblicizing English. It sounds like somebody's trying so hard to sound like the King James Version of the Bible that they're creating this absurdly weird grammar to do it.
To try and make it.
Just, if you don't think that this is something that people do, like, go back to the Book of Armaments and, chapter 9, verses 12 to 21, right? St. Edelot raised a hand grenade up on high and said, "O Lord, bless us thy hand grenade." And the Lord did grant unto the people to feast upon lambs and sloths and anchovies and orangutans and breakfast cereals and fruit bats and loins, and right? And like,
I am so impressed with you right now.
This is biblicizing English, right? We are trying to sound like we are speaking biblically. We're coming from a Hebraic source, and we're messing around with the English grammar to do it. And
we sound Bible-y enough. Look,
right. And I really need to go back. So if you watch the Apocalypse of Abraham video, that I did, where I talked about
Mhm.
Dr. Paulson Reed's dissertation and how she talks about how like chiasm and these like the mini ands and all this
Yeah.
stuff that show up that they do appear in the Apocalypse of Abraham, and these are evidences that point towards a Hebraic origin. Like that is true; it does point to a Hebraic origin, but that it is the weakest of the evidence for that. It is just very, very weak evidence to indicate like a Hebraic source for the text, because what this also points to, what this is also evidence for, is biblicizing Greek in the context of the
Yes.
Apocalypse of Abraham, right? In the context of the Book of Mormon, it would be biblicizing English. And
English. Yeah.
that is why I have the three-factor test. Again, another video, 2 videos
Right.
now on that, is to try and get away from this biblicizing English sound.
Yeah.
And what this section in Jerem sounds like, besides incredibly racist, is also biblicizing English.
Yeah.
Okay, so verse 8, we're going to have some more anachronisms here. So the people of Nephi, they're rich in gold, they're rich in silver, precious things. They have fine workmanship of wood, wink, and buildings, machinery. And now here we're going to get to some anachronistic stuff. So in iron and copper, brass and steel. And I want to point to this because we have iron and steel, and that they are shown to be separate things. When we talked about the Vera Jericho sword, and we talked about how we have like this very like low grade steel in terms of like poor quality steel in that
Yeah.
sword that would have dated to the time that could be a candidate for like a sword of Laban. Um, yeah, we were talking about like something that was so close to just being iron that it was still pretty much
Right.
just iron. It's steel, but
But barely.
but barely, right? It's very poor quality steel. Um, yeah, we have this distinction where they are claiming to be working as a pre-Columbian people with iron, and then specifically with steel as an alloy. Um,
And weren't
and
you saying what army was the first? What did you? What did
oh,
we end up pre?
so what we were trying to kind of find where like iron weapons really start to show up in the record, and by the Peloponnesian War in roughly the 430s to the 400s BCE, we have Hellenistic people using
Right.
iron weapons. And over on the Indian subcontinent, there was a group of people who, by about 550 BCE to 500
Mm-hmm.
BCE, earliest, had
Yeah.
developed the technology to start smelting iron,
Mm-hmm.
which is the technology that Nephi would have required to have his narrative make any sense. And that technology did not exist except potentially about 30 years later at the earliest on the Indian subcontinent. He would have been in Arabia, according to
Right,
the
and
apology.
not enough to just having swords running around Jerusalem.
And definitely not that, right? Definitely
Yeah.
not that. And the way that the people on the Indian subcontinent who were smelting iron had it working was they essentially had like these massive, like precursors to wind turbines and this like
Oh,
fantastic
jeez.
jet stream that would roll through, and those that would allow them to generate the wind necessary to get the fire hot enough to smelt the iron. It's like this
Wow.
incredible like innovation to be able to do that, and it
Yeah.
was not available in Arabia, and you definitely do not see that infrastructure in place in pre-Columbian America
Oh,
uh, at any point.
not. Yeah.
So the issue with steel is that not only would it leave a trace, but in order to produce steel, you need so much infrastructure that it would
Yeah.
leave archaeological stuff behind.
It's
Um,
kind of hard to miss. It's not like, oh, oops, I
right.
totally missed that smelting thing. It was under this tiny rock. No, it's a building, people.
It's not just a building, it is a network. It is like you need multiple things working together to make that
Mm,
happen. This is the same thing with like the scale of the wars that we're talking about in the Book of
yes.
Mormon. We're going to get into that in detail when we get into the war chapters. But in order for like the wars to make sense, you need this infrastructure in place to support these supply lines. And it's the supply lines that you usually have evidence for. The
Right.
battles do have a tendency to disappear.
Yeah,
From
that's fair.
you will find stuff from battles from time to time, but battles have a tendency to vanish.
Yeah.
What is a lot more likely to remain preserved are the clay pots and the signs of camps and all of that. This is what archaeologists just like live for and what they find. And
Yeah.
they find the evidence for these supply lines to support the idea that there were these wars and these battles and all of that. And the you can get a sense of scale from what's left behind to indicate like what the supply chains actually were. And there is no evidence that suggests that the armies that are discussed, like the scale of the armies that are discussed in the Book of Mormon, were even remotely possible.
That these aren't three guys having a slap fight in somebody's backyard. I mean, this is
yeah, right. So you don't have like the Book of Mormon doesn't discuss the sort of like wars that would have been possible in pre-Columbian America. And the wars that the Book of Mormon describes, like the sizes of those civilizations didn't exist. Like you don't have urbanized areas to that extent. It's just what the Book of Mormon describes in terms of its wars is just it's off the charts relative to what would have been available in pre-Columbian America. Okay, so you have steel, you have the iron and steel distinction, and we're not loving that. We've got the sharp pointed arrow. That's interesting. The quiver, the dart, the javelin. All of these are really
because before then they hadn't realized you needed to sharpen it, so that was just like a
the sharp pointed arrow.
Right before then they just had like little squares. They didn't.
Which makes me wonder is like are the Lamanites like used because they're experts in the bow, right? Are they like putting like boxing gloves on the end of theirs? And just, like,
I
know. In the which
comes
case,
out with flowers.
In the which case, the Lamanites are much more civilized than the Nephites are. Like using non-lethal warfare. That is amazing. That is actually a fantastic progressive advancement on the part of the Lamanites.
The totally very real. they kind of go back and forth, but
Yeah. Okay, so let's see here. There's some preaching and whatnot. I really think that's it for Jerem. Let's see. So with Jerem, there was another date in here somewhere. I thought.
I thought there was two. We talked about it, but I can't remember.
It might be an Omni. I think it's an Omni where that date shows up. Let's pop over to Omni.
Okay. At least that one doesn't sound like body parts that rhyme with other things.
Yeah. It just sounds like a certain like set of attributes for God. So if I recall correctly, we had Jerem at 232.
Yeah, and I can't remember.
There it is. It's in verse 13. 238 years had passed away. So 3 generations.
Yep.
Jacob, Enos, Jerem. Totally for 238 years.
Totally doable.
Okay.
Normal all the time. Every day.
Yep. Oops. All right. Let's see. So then we get into Omni, and Omni we have 276 years. And then he ultimately, and that's where all these wars and stuff are happening. He's not a righteous dude. And then in 282 years had passed away, he gives the plates over to his son Amram. So for our 4 generations, we're now at 282 years. So we're still at 70 years roughly per generation.
Yeah.
Which is excessively long.
It really kind of is. I mean, just is everybody procreating as their octogenarians now? I don't understand.
Pretty much what we have to have, right? 320 years pass away for Amaron. So we're tightening this up a bit to get that 5th generation, but it's still let's see, and the more wicked part is destroyed. The thing is, we're in that 5th generation here with Amaron. But he's going to pass the plates over to his brother Chemish. So we're in the same generation, and then Chemish goes dark on when he passes the plates over to Abinadom, his son. So we don't know exactly when Chemish gave the plates to Abinadom.
When the transfer happened at that point. Okay.
Yep. Abinadom makes no record of that. He's going to pass the plates over to his son Amaleki. And Amaleki, we know, is alive during the reign of Mosiah the First. And Mosiah the First is roughly 200 BCE.
Okay.
So we can work with that to an extent.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. And Amaleki talks about Mosiah the First, and in particular, he's going to talk about the meeting of the people of Mosiah and the people of Zarahemla. And Zarahemla is a descendant of Mulek. And so these are the Mulekites. They are not called the Mulekites here. They are not called the people of Mulek. And when Mulek has a chance to be named here, despite having been named over in Helaman, he is not named at this point. And so this is Mosiah priority, right? The first thing that's written is Mosiah. This is one of the very last things that is written in the Book of Mormon as we have it today.
I remember in the pregame, I was like, wait, so why not just, you're like, he forgot.
Like, this is going to happen twice, actually, in this section, because what we talked about in the pregame is actually Zenith. We're talking Mulek here.
The whole thing is like, he just forgot. I was trying to make it so much more complicated.
Yeah. So he just forgot the name Mulek, right, is the most likely explanation here. He gets to this point, he's like, the descendant of Zedekiah. So it's at the time of Zedekiah, those people left. Yeah. So Zarahemla is the descendant there, and we're not naming the Mulekites, right? Because the term Mulekite is never used in the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
That's something that we basically created outside of the Book of Mormon to describe the people who descended from Mulek. And Mulek is not named here; he's named in Helaman. And then there's no time after that where Mulek gets named, and so then we pop over all the way to this section. Joseph gets to this. He's like, the son of Zedekiah.
What was that guy's name?
It's the people of Zarahemla, and they were the descendant from the time of they left Zedekiah. Yeah, and that's what we have in verse 15.
It's for a wise purpose, y'all. It's for a wise purpose.
This is perfectly consistent, right, with Joseph just kind of creating this thing. And I'm going to loop back to that. I'm going to loop back to that point. Hold that point in the back of your mind, because we'll come back to that. Actually, let's close it out here. So let's jump all the way down. We'll go to Zenith.
I have ADHD, so the fact that I'm going to try and remember anything is really brave of you.
Yeah. So here at the end of Omni, we have the section where we're creating the glue, right? That's going to bind the small plates and the large plates together. And Amaleki here at the end of his life is going to mention that he has a brother who's gone off with the people of Zenith, right? There's this large number of people, or a certain number of people, who go to the wilderness trying to return to the land of Nephi. There's a large number who want to do this. So they go up to the wilderness. They're led by a strong and mighty man, a stiff-necked man. Zenith doesn't get mentioned here at all. So there is this mighty man who causes a contention, and Zenith kills the dude. And he comes back again, and he leads this group out. Why is Zenith in no way mentioned here? Like, there is this one opportunity, this one chance to have two separate stories told at distinctly separate times. And the proper noun that links these two stories together is not used.
Right, exactly.
Why?
Because we forgot.
The most likely...
The wise purpose.
The most likely
purpose,
most likely explanation is, in fact, that Joseph forgot the name. He couldn't remember the name, or wasn't confident in having remembered the name, but he remembered the story. And so the story survives because the story is easy to remember, but the name is harder. And so the name disappears from this particular point. The apologists love to talk about complexity of the Book of Mormon, and one of the things they love to use is all the names. There are like 250 names that show up in the Book of Mormon, 250 proper nouns. How do you have that many proper nouns? How could Joseph Smith have come up with all those names? Well, the names are never connected. They, at a time where you have like this opportunity to link the names together,
to bring it all together,
it doesn't get done. This is where I land in the camp of the Book of Mormon is not as complex as you're arguing that it is. And this is one of those examples. And apologists love the complexity argument. Okay.
But the boy could barely read, y'all. Come on.
Right.
He came up with 250 names.
Right. Okay. So the people of Zarahemla, they have their language all messed up because they didn't have any records. But they did have their genealogy because Zarahemla had it memorized. And I thought that was interesting. We talked about that a little bit in the pregame. So Bill Davis was on Mormonism with the Murph, and he talked about the like Joseph's like capability to have like a genealogy memorized. And
Yeah.
he demonstrated how that would have been possible by showing like that he had memorized, that Davis had memorized the Jaredite Kings list forward and backwards. Like literally has it memorized forward and backwards. Did a demonstration of it live on that episode with of Mormonism with the Murph. And he refers back to like how like there are some like indigenous American peoples and like other peoples who would have the genealogies memorized, and like this was a part of like the culture to memorize these genealogies, and how this gets expressed. It's interesting that this gets expressed in the text as well.
Yeah.
Zarahemla here in verse 18 gives a genealogy of his fathers according to his memory.
Well, and you and I were talking, so growing up Southern Baptist in Texas, y'all, hey. I don't know how familiar our listeners would be. In the South, it's very common to have what's known as the family Bible. It's going to have your genealogy in the front. It's going to have, you know, all the way back to your great grandparents, whatever, all the way down. And you memorize it because of reasons. I don't know, probably the same reason everybody takes pictures with dead people in the casket and puts it in the family album, because we're weird in the South and cable is not as popular as it should be. But yeah, we would memorize that and go over it in church. You have your genie, and this is not the LDS, this is the Southern Baptist religion, but also memorizing those so-and-so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so begat, so-and-so in the Bible. Absolutely. We would have that memorized where we could say it forward, backward, and we're talking young Sunday school kids for just because, I guess. So yeah, I can't, but my sister can still do all of the so-and-so begat so-and-sos. And so yeah, it's I guess what we do for fun in the South.
And so, like, what are the odds that Joseph Smith, who also did not have cable and who also was an American Protestant, would have had a similar practice?
Absolutely, no doubt in my mind.
And this was one of like Dr. Davis, Bill Davis. I don't know what his accolades actually are, what his titles actually are. Sorry, Davis.
I don't know either.
It wasn't really well enunciated in that video, or I just kind of missed it as I listened to everything at 2x speed. Anyway, anyway, that was one of his points in that video, is that you know, this was likely a part of the Sunday school tradition that Joseph Smith was raised in, and so
I have no doubt it was. It's very common.
Yep. So if that's the case, then Joseph clearly has the memorization skills that are available, and little self-insert right into the text again, as we see showing up. All right, let's see here. So there's this fancy stone after the colonizer Mosiah takes over the people of Zarahemla and subjugates them and forces them to learn his language. They had this stone that they bring to him that has these engravings on it. And Mosiah interprets the engravings by the gift and power of God. And it gives this account of one Coriantumr and the slaying of his people. And Coriantumr was discovered by the people of Zarahemla at some point before Mosiah enters the picture. So I don't know exactly when the Jaredites vanish per se, but at some point in time before Mosiah meets the people of Zarahemla. So between like maybe like 590 and 220 BCE, 210 BCE, Coriantumr shows up, and he dwelt with them for the space of 9 moons, because that's the
way we tell time.
That's because racism.
I was gonna say, I'm surprised they didn't just bust out from the shores of Gitchigumi to the shining big sea waters.
There are some places where you can like kind of put in like stereotypical American Indian voice into the section of the Book of Mormon, and it's like, oh, Joseph.
Okay, so this reminds me, because let's be honest, nobody is as racist as Disney, because I'm just trying to piss off as many corporations as possible, I suppose. It always reminds me of the part in Peter Pan when they go to meet the American Indians or the Native Americans. And I watched that again as an adult, and I was just like, wow,
Yeah.
guys, wow. And this kind of reminds me of that. Like, why is
Yep.
the red man red? Come on, Walt.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yep. This, I think that that Joseph Smith needed Chief Ken of the Wamapoke tribe from
Yeah.
Parks and Rec standing over his shoulder.
Yes.
Plays white people like a fiddle.
As a white person, I can confirm.
It's one of my favorite characters on that show. It's hilarious.
Yes.
Anyway, okay. So we find out as well that Coriantumr is descended from the people who came out from the tower at the time the Lord confounded the language of the people.
What tower is that, Perry?
What tower do you think it is, Lolo?
There's so many to choose from. That happens so often in the Bible. Golly.
Okay, so if you're not aware of why right now I am just like covering up barely contained rage, it's because there is this habit among certain apologists to look at this particular passage as well as the passage in Ether that says much the same, and where it says that it doesn't say it's the Tower of Babel. It never calls it the Tower of Babel. It never mentions Babel here. Yeah, no, it just describes the confounding of the language of the people. I mean, what other towers could this happen at? So the issue is apologist who's going to use that asinine apologetic, that slimy, sleazy, intellectually dishonest apologetic. If you're going to use it, what other tower was the language of the people confounded at then? It was at Babel.
Wasn't that in the... Oh, wait, which Stephen King book, The Dark Tower? That's the tower. That's
yeah. Was there confounded the language of the people of the Dark Tower? Also, if you want if you want to historicize the anachronistic, then Dark Tower from Stephen King. No,
remember Matthew McConaughey discussed it in the movie.
The problem is that there is no historical tower at which languages were confounded. It's ahistorical. Yeah. And if what you're recognizing is that the Tower of Babel is ahistorical because it didn't happen, like the same issue applies no matter which tower you want to do. And so this is mytho-history. You have to deal with it, apologist. Quit being sleazy, quit being intellectually dishonest, and recognize that what the Book of Mormon is clearly talking about is that the Jaredites came from the Tower of Babel. Like, that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, there's no other way.
There are few apologetics that piss me off as much as that one. And it is because it is so underhanded, so sleazy, so intellectually dishonest. It drives me nuts. It drives me nuts, except that what the Book of Mormon is talking about is the Tower of Babel. And let's move on. Let's move from there.
It's scriptural gaslighting.
It's it's like the worst of the worst of apologetics, honestly.
Yeah.
I would rather have the ad hominem like BS over this.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
Yeah. Anyway, Coriantumr was a descendant of people who came from the Tower of Babel. Our Babel is an ahistorical event. Yeah. Anyway, that just substantiates that. It also says that the bones lay scattered in the land northward there. So I am concerned that there might be somebody who may think that the Jaredite plates are like missing somewhere from the story. They show up later. They're going to be brought back in when the people of Zenith make their escape from the land of Nephi. So that's when the Jaredite plates show up. They get brought to Mosiah. We're going to talk about like seers and all of that. And then we're going to talk about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and how we sustain the leaders of that church, because it's going to be very interesting. Yeah, very fascinating time. Let's see here. There was one other fun thing that we talked about. Okay, So here in verse 25, there is
Oh,
nothing
yeah.
which is good, save it comes from the Lord, and that which is evil cometh from the devil. All right, so this was the basis of my very first blog. And it goes something like this. So in the Genesis account, and in the Moses account, and in the temple endowment, God makes an observation about the state of humanity. It's the very first observation of the state of humanity that God makes, and that is that it is not good that man should be alone. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with respect to its LGBTQ members, holds the position that they shouldn't get married because
It's wrong, wrong, bad.
it's wrong, wrong,
Obviously.
bad. They shouldn't marry other, like, you can't do the gay marriage, but they also shouldn't marry like in a straight marriage either anymore. Like, that's now discouraged.
Oh, that's
In
right. I forgot that part.
other words, they advocate for the position that LGBTQ members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints should remain alone. And
No.
the first thing that God observes about the state of humanity is that that is not good. Therefore, it must needs be that the teaching of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with respect to LGBTQ members is not good and does not come from the Lord. And
Mic drop.
if it does not come from the Lord, from whence cometh it? Is my question. And
Oh,
I
no, I
said
dropped
from
my
whence.
mic too soon.
Yeah, I said from whence to mimic Book of Mormon type language.
Well, yeah, because it's from the Bible. I get it. Totally.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Whence, just saying whence is all I've needed. From whence is like redundant and all that stuff.
Exactly.
From whence cometh that teaching? And
Wow.
it's not from God.
Maybe it was
Yeah,
Moses. I mean, maybe he jumped in. Maybe God had a day off.
yeah.
He
I
did
don't know.
rest on the whatever it's day.
Yeah, maybe God's still resting.
Really feel
Okay.
like we should wake him up when September ends. Wait.
Yeah, yeah. We woke up Green Day, so we might as well also.
Wake up, God.
All right, so I want to get into the genius of Joseph Smith here, and that is Words of Mormon. And so we talked a little bit
Yes.
about how, like, there's this narrative glue at the end of Omni that's now binding the small plates to the large plates. Joseph Smith has clearly been very troubled by the loss of the 116 pages, and it shows up a few times in the small plates account, and it is going to show up here again, really in Words of Mormon, where we finally are like, hey, I, Mormon, found these plates. And while as I was going through doing my abridgment, I'm like, oh, this is super cool. I'm just going to go ahead and add these in because they're pleasing to me. I like what's written on here. These are good. I like them. And also, I do this for a wise purpose. And you've been riffing on this throughout the episode. And
I have.
the thing about this term is that it shows up in Nephi. It shows up, as we said, like Nephi is kind of like making the same types of words that Joseph Smith is using in the Doctrine and Covenants. And Mormon is using this term. And so across like a period of at least 1,000 years, this same term is getting used. And that's unusual. It's odd that this would appear this way. It is more indicative the same author is using this to try and describe this particular solution, that it is a wise purpose. Now, with that said, I do find this to be clever. I think that for what Joseph Smith was trying to accomplish, putting in Words of Mormon is incredibly smart. It's this like, hey, we've got this weird thing, and it allows for the possibility that the large plates or that the lost 116 pages might show up again. And it gives like this wiggle room for him to play with. I think it's clever. It doesn't make a whole lot of narrative sense, and RFM talked about the problems with it in his episode on it. But I think this is really clever. I think that Joseph Smith was smart here. And I think it gives him some wiggle room and some space in communicating with his audience and hanging a lantern on it. Like, this is one of those, like, I see what's going on here kind of a thing. And I love it. This is just one of those like little clever sections that I appreciate the Book of Mormon for.
I know this is not what the way I imagine this is in The Office when they do those direct to camera little interviews. I'm like, this is what they're doing. This is what that is. We're moving the narrative along. with
That's
the
really what I
direct
see
to
too from
camera.
it. I think this is great. I love the section of the Book of Mormon, or at least this passage in the Book of Mormon where we have Mormon just popping in, and he's gonna tie up the loose ends and get us right to where we need to be to start this, and it's great. It's great. I love it. It's completely unnecessary. It shouldn't need to be there, but I love it, and it's just one of those things that I think that this shows up as Joseph Smith being clever. He saw a
Yeah,
problem, had a solution for it, and it's a pretty elegant solution, all things
it
considered.
really is. It really is.
I,
Especially
it,
since the boy was basically, I think he had an IQ of
could
4.
not tie his own shoes.
Yeah.
This is, yeah.
Helen Keller could see better than that boy could think. So,
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And yet we get this. I don't know.
ah,
This for me, I think that it's really funny how both apologists and some of the early critics just like are calling Joseph Smith just the biggest idiot on the face of the planet. And this is here, and like, yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of narrative sense, but I think it shows how smart he was. And
oh, yeah.
I think he's clever. It's smart.
Oh, yeah.
It's like it's somebody who's so wrapped up in their own world that they can't see past their own 2 feet. But
Yes.
from that perspective, this is clever.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
that's what I've got this week.
I feel good about all that. I co-sign on that, Perry.
All
I
right, well, we're
co-sign
gonna
on this
wrap up.
episode.
Audience, thank you so much for your support. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, share with all of your friends. And please leave in the comments just something that you'd like for me to cover during my rest period. It's gonna be great.
Y'all, do the D&D profit thing. Comment that.
And I mean, I didn't hear anything there, so
What? I
this
didn't.
was clear. This was clearly a secret that Lola was just
Yeah.
communicating.
What?
All right. Otherwise, we'll see you next week, where we'll be pressing on and getting into the large plates with Mosiah, and I can't be more excited about it. All right. We'll
Thank
see
you,
you.
Perry. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.